Jedediah Bila is a mom, wife, daughter, and superhero wannabe, a two-time Emmy Award nominee. She's been the host of ABC's The View, Fox News, Fox and Friends Weekend, and the Lifetime special Abby Tells All. She's also the author of Do Not Disturb, How I Ghosted My Cell Phone to Take Back My Life, and now the work of Dear Hartley, which I have read. And Jedediah, thank you so much, and congratulations on the new book coming out in 1 week now.
Thank you so much. Yes. And actually, as I was juggling all the tech here, which, you mentioned my other book, # Do Not Disturb, that book talks about how bad I am with technology. So if you're confused, like, hey, Jed, it's 2021, like what's going on? That will explain everything to you. That is why I am unable to manage 2 technical devices at once. But yes, the book comes out on Tuesday. So super excited.
Yeah. And listen, I totally get it. My father is one that doesn't have a cell phone, as you may know this. And I myself too, I'm just brand new to all of this. So we are fortunate we're actually talking right now. And there are like silences and gaps and everything to this. But listen, I want to jump into this and I want to open it up to other people as well very soon with their question, because this isn't Ask Me Anything sort of thing. And I do want to hear what people want to say. But I wanted to start with my own question here, because I read the book. I loved it. I really did enjoy every minute of it. I thought it was an emotional book. It actually got me, tugging at those heartstrings a little bit, because it is.
I've done my job. Then I've done my job.
Yes, it is a book written to your child, Hartley. Dear Hartley is the name. And there was the letter or chapter, Back to the Future Fuel, which talks a little bit about your struggle with Lyme disease and how you ended up at a holistic center in Long Island, which I'm guessing is this one.
Is that one? Yes. And
you know what?
I thought about naming it, and I was like, you know what? People who hate me are then going to hate the scent. I'm like, what do I do with this? I'm like, how do I navigate this? But yeah, I did land in your dad's patient chair. And I can tell people a little bit about what that looked like for me.
I want to hear that story, because as much as we are digital friends and we met once, and again, I'm going to put that in quotes because I remember running down the stairs and opening a door and bumping into you once in a second. I don't know if you remember that, but that's the only time we
don't remember that. But
we physically met once, and that was it. And it was an awkward hi with masks on, like running by each other because I was like running to do something. But I want to hear the story, because I don't know it. And I know Lyme patients in general love to hear stories of others who are now healthy. So could you share a little bit about your story and your journey with Lyme disease?
Oh, it was wild. It was life-changing in many ways, both good and bad. But essentially, I was, 36 years old. I'm 42 now, so not that many years ago. And I went out to the Hamptons for a weekend. And I never went in the grass. I sat on a deck, and I came home that weekend. I had a little rash on my leg that looked it didn't itch. It didn't bother me. It was in a weird spot. I could have completely missed it. I didn't, luckily, but it was a little circle. In 24 hours, it was gone. I knew nothing about ticks. I grew up in, New York City, Staten Island, Brooklyn, you don't grow up hearing about a tick population and the potential dangers of that. I came home. I was like, you know what? I'll go to the doctor for this. It was gone before I could even go to the doctor. I said, oh, it must have been nothing. Okay. A few weeks later, I'm in bed sleeping, and I wake up. I am drenching my bed in sweats. I mean, I was like, am I getting sick? I said, oh, I must be getting a virus, or maybe I was getting a flu or something, and it just kind of worked its way out of my body. Goes away. A few weeks later, I am feeling exhausted. Now, not just tired, but the type of fatigue that I couldn't even describe to a doctor. I was like, you don't understand. And they were saying, well, you're stressed, you're busy. And I was like, no, you don't get it. I'm an athlete. Like, I typically run to the gym, work out, run home, do sit-ups at home, and then I have a whole day. I can't even walk around my apartment without feeling like I'm going to collapse. They ran some tests. Everything came back normal. They're like, oh, you're fine. I said, oh, great. Okay. A few months pass. This is going on months now. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting in front of my television, and I feel like the right side of my face is numb. I completely panicked. I said, oh my gosh, did I have a stroke? Like, what is going on? Tingling, numbness, oddness. That escalated. I would be on television. At one point, I was, rotating co-host at the time over at Fox, and I would be sitting in the green room, and I would get these rushes of panic. And I'd be like, wait a minute, I'm not nervous being on TV. Like I'm not I had never really suffered from panic attacks. I was like, what is this? It felt physical. And whenever I would tell somebody about it, they say, oh, you're just stressed out. I was like, no, you don't get it. Work doesn't stress me like that. Being on camera is probably the easiest thing for me. Like that's not where my stress goes. And this doesn't feel like that. It feels physical. Like it was a wave, like my neurological system was spazzing out. No one believed me. Okay. This went on for a few months. The symptoms were wild. But finally I got a diagnosis. I went to my primary care physician. She calls me one day and she says, you have Lyme disease. And I said, I have what? I said, I'm just fixing this to make sure the IG Live, we're going to need a charger in there. I have Lyme disease. And I said, how did I get Lyme disease? And she said, I don't know. She said, but don't worry. We caught it early. You're going to take 2 weeks of antibiotics and you're going to be fine. I was like, okay, we caught it early. And I went, did my research. I saw, oh, if you catch it early, that's true. You can just take your antibiotics. You'll be good to go. Well, I started the antibiotics. It made me sicker. She was like, oh, that happens sometimes. The antibiotics can aggravate the bugs. I said, okay, well, I'll be sicker for a couple of weeks. Well, that led to months and months and months of here, take more antibiotics. Oh, take another round of antibiotics. Oh, I wound up doing, I think 4 months of doxycycline. I was taking all of this stuff that wasn't working. What were my symptoms? I was sitting on television sets and I was spinning, completely spinning, massive, massive vertigo. I was reading prompter and I was holding onto the couch for dear life because I was like, I feel like I'm going to fall over. I felt like I was on a tilt-a-whirl. At one point I was describing to people that I felt like the sidewalk was tilted and I was walking and they were like, oh, like a seasick feeling. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm actually walking crooked because I feel like I'm compensating for the ground when actually I don't need to be. It was wild. I mean, it was really, really wild. I turned to Chinese medicine for a little bit, hoping that would help. I think to an extent, the herbals did help me more so than the antibiotics had, but I always felt like I'd get a little bit better and then I'd get a little bit worse. Now, the frustrating thing is that I was functional. I was able to exercise. I was not bedridden. I was able to work, but I had brain fog, which try being on television doing the news with brain fog. That was fun. I had brain fog. I had odd rushes of palpitations, things I had never had in my life. I had odd temperature deregulation. Vertigo was crazy. So I felt like a sick person. I don't know if that makes sense. And I couldn't get someone to understand. They'd say, well, if you were really sick, you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing. And I was like, no, I'm now functionally I'm sick, but I've mastered how to not feel well and hide it. So I'm functional, but I feel like horrible. So I was doing a ton of research online. I finally came across your clinic and I was like, I don't know. I said, I've tried I just don't know. Some of the stuff I was reading, I was like, I don't know, but I felt so ill. And people should, know that before this, I felt great. I mean, I had a bout of acid reflux when I was in college, but I was a strong runner, tons of energy. Really never got sick. I wasn't someone that was used to feeling so vulnerable and so bad all the time. By the time I got to your dad's clinic, I was struggling to walk from point A to point B without feeling like I needed a break. So I was like, okay, if these people don't help me, I have nothing to lose. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to be like, I'm here. I went in and it was a really great experience for me because it was the first time somebody looked at me as a whole person. I had always been like, oh, you have Lyme. This is the condition. These are the treatments. Even when I went through the Chinese herbals, I felt like I was like a number, like, oh, these are the herbal remedies we give for this condition. And I was like, well, no one's asking what happened to me before, what was going on before all this. And were there any triggers? And no one was looking at me as a whole, but I felt like your center did. And that made me feel like, okay, at least they care about figuring out the whole puzzle. And the treatments are unconventional in some ways, as you know. So some of them I was like, come on, and you have great nurses, but there is something that really, you have to trust your gut, because when I walked in there, I felt a sense of calm, like somewhere someone had sent me to this place and it was just okay. So, and I got better, I got better and I was like, wow, by the time I was done with the first month of treatment, I wasn't dizzy anymore at all, which was huge because I couldn't walk around. I mean, I couldn't drive. I was like, everything would just spin. I was like, wow, why aren't I dizzy anymore? The supplements, which ordinarily I can't take a lot of supplements because they make me sick. None of them, I was taking like a bunch a day and I was like, I'm not getting sick. Why? I just felt like I was in good hands and I was, I followed like that 6-week protocol for diet. I was really good about taking everything. I know it's hard, but I was like, I want this fixed. Like, I'm done feeling like this. And it was a decision I made that I was like, you know what, I'm going to go all in. So I did that and I continue to feel better. And I do notice that, the thing about Lyme is that for me, and I know it's different for everyone, right? And this is why I battle against one size fits all medicine, because I had friends who were taking herbals and doing great. I had, everyone was doing something different, but that wasn't working for me. And this wasn't, I had to find my own path. And so I think innovation in medicine is integral to anyone actually getting better, because you have to know your own body. You have to figure out what's going on, and everyone's body is very different. But I do find that once you go through something like this, like I am in a more sensitive body, you gain a deeper understanding of your body, but you also know, like, for example, if I go out and I take a bunch of supplements now that aren't good quality, I feel it. I'm like, oh, I took something, I can smell toxic chemicals. If someone's painting 3 houses down using something they shouldn't be using, I'm your girl. I will tell you, I will be like, there are days when my mom's like, I'm like, did you spray perfume like upstairs? And she's like, upstairs in a separate house. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm telling you, man, like, I know, like you're more sensitive, right?
You're the canary in the cave. You're the one sensing right body, before anyone else does.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of a superpower in itself.
It is,
because
totally.
I'm like, oh, this is, you have to look for the silver lining, but I feel much, I feel like me, like I did before, sometimes better, honestly, because it forced me to also look at diet. It forced me to look at supplements. It forced me to look at things that I would have probably never really looked at. So yeah, it was, that's the silver. And I don't say, oh, honestly, if I could go back and not get Lyme disease, I would definitely go back and not get it. But there are, you have to look at your life and say, okay, there are some things that came of this that ultimately in the long run are going to be good. But thank God I found you guys. I mean, truly, I would have been lost, because that's what happens, for people out there who've struggled. And it's not just Lyme disease, but autoimmune issues, I know, cause a lot of, you're like talking to people who don't listen, and they're like, oh, you're fine. Like, and this happened to me. I had COVID as well. I remember after COVID, after I got it about 1.5 years ago, I had like a couple of months where I was like, my breathing is not quite right. You go to a traditional medicine doctor, they say, oh, all your tests look great. And I'm like, I'm an athlete. And when I run, something's not adding up because I don't have the breath I should. So I think it's a lot of trusting your own body, finding someone that you can actually talk to, and also adding all the pieces of the puzzle together. Like I had conversations with your dad about sleep and about, stress, things that were really hard for me to approach in my own life, because there were things that I just didn't take seriously and I didn't want to take seriously. Like I didn't want to believe my mindset is really an obstacle if it's in the wrong place, because that's hard to accept. You're like, oh, I need to do work on me now in a different way. I can't just take a supplement or eat a different food or exercise. This was mental work. So it was hard to face that, but it was necessary. And to this day, if I go in, to see him if I feel like, oh, I feel a little off, let me go in, he'll be like, well, are you do you meditate? He knows in me, like he's kind of a magician. Anyone who's met him knows, and he kind of just knows, and he's always right. I mean, it's crazy, but he's always right. And when I tweak that, I feel better. So I always tell people, if you go to a doctor and repeatedly and you don't feel better from what's happening, something's wrong. Something is wrong. If your body rejects, like I've gone places and I take stuff and I'm like, when I go and I get a treatment at the clinic, and this is not meant to be an endorsement of the clinic, but this is really my story. But when I go, I come home and I always tell my husband it's the best night's sleep I ever had in my life, because my body welcomes, like it knows this is good for you. It's just, so follow that gut, follow that instinct. But it gave me a really big passion, Casper, for people really trusting their own gut, having trusted relationships with trusted doctors, and pursuing paths that feel right for them, even if that may be a different path from someone else.
Yeah. And I feel like so many people that go through Lyme disease and come out the other end, they echo that same sentiment of now they're more in touch with themselves. They value their health more. Yeah. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, and a lot of what I read in the book, it's a lot about what's going on right now, right? It was written to your son, but it's a lot about like COVID, like pandemic, like how this changed and what you're hoping you can instill in your son Hartley as he grows up. And I really like some of that because it was about ownership. It was about, feeling your feelings in a sense. And that's a lot about what we tell patients. And I think that's healing. And right now, don't you agree that this nation needs some healing? Both ourselves need to heal from traumas, from all these things we've had, but also as a nation to come together. Is that something you wanted to really put into this book and just kind of came out through that?
Yeah. So, the book started, Dear Hartley started as a series of letters to Hartley because he was a pandemic baby. He was 4 months old. He had COVID, by the way. His only symptom was eczema, which actually now we look back and say, oh, I don't even think that was from the COVID. There was some other stuff going on that may have attributed to that. But at the time I was like, it must be from that. But he had nothing else. He laughed through the whole thing. I had it. My husband had it. But I wrote the book initially for him and with that whole generation in mind, because I felt like they were experiencing something that I couldn't even imagine, being a child, and you couldn't go play with other kids the way you ordinarily would. You couldn't do like mommy and me's. You couldn't do, daddy daycare. Like you couldn't do these things. You couldn't take swim lessons with. So I was like, there were things that I was observing in the world that were concerning. There were things that I was worried about. And I said, you know what? I want to create something that's an anchor for him in life that he can revisit when he's 10, 20, 30, 40. And each chapter, it's filled with my mistakes I've made. I wanted him to know that mistakes are okay. They're a part of life. We all make them. But I wanted him to be grounded in the idea that free thinking and freedom and character and empathy and all of these things. And fear is a part of life. Everyone gets afraid at one point or another. I wanted to be honest with him. And I wanted to create a channel where we could all be honest with each other that these things happen. And there are things that ground you and build strong nations, build strong people. And some of that is just self-awareness. Some of that is willingness to go to places in your mind where you're like, I'm afraid. Okay, let's talk about why. Some of that is, understanding what real good character means. And some of that is enabling him and all of us to be free thinking people. And that's dying. I've worked in media for a long time and it's dying. It's dying in journalism. This is not a place where people go in television anymore to really speak their minds. There's always an approved line of thought. There's always, a company endorsed talking point. I was tired of all of that and I was living it. And I wanted my kid to know you're capable of thinking for yourself and being a strong person. And, when it comes to your health and wellness, own that journey, live it and do what you need to do for you. So it was a book for him, but it was also for all of us. And I think, I thought about students and teachers and, kids in college who feel like they're on a campus where they can't speak their mind, whatever your ideology is. I don't care what it is. Or parents who felt like they had, what do I do? I feel like, I can't even turn on the news and get actual news, or will I have a free thinking child? Or, it was meant to appeal to many, many generations. And yeah, the world has gone mad, in my view, in many ways, when it comes to mandates, when it comes to, I could not foresee that. But it's even more important. This book is even more important now. To share a little bit of my story. I had COVID a year and a half ago, as I said. I have sky high natural immunity. And I mean sky high, really. My vaccinated infectious disease doctor in New York City is like, wow, I wish my numbers looked like this. That's what I get. And I'm like, great. It was silver lining. Listen, it wasn't great to have COVID, but okay, this is my silver lining. Well, guess what? I also have a medical exemption because of some stuff I've gone through in my life from 4 now doctors. And I can't work, right? I can't work in my industry. I can't show up to a television studio because of these rules that are utterly ridiculous and not grounded in science. So I've been kind of battling that as well, just because if this is about health and this is about science, then it needs to be about those things. Then people with medical exemptions need to be acknowledged. Everyone's in a different body. Everyone has a different past. It's not for me to tell someone else what they should or shouldn't do with their bodies. That's not my job. What it is for me to do is to protect myself as I see fit. If I want to get vaccinated, great. You have that option. You can go, you can get the vaccine. If you believe in that protection, guess what? You don't need to worry about what everyone else is doing, because then you are protected. I have natural immunity. I don't worry about anyone else when it comes to COVID. I am grounded in that. I believe in it. I can see it numerically. I can see it in multiple labs. I'm not worried about what everyone else is doing. And so I wrote the book before all this happened. But once it happened, I realized, wow, all of the things I wrote in here about free thinking and health and wellness and owning your own journey and being your own person and having the guts to speak up for yourself. This keeps going dark on me. I keep doing that, but I don't know if I need to. Having the guts to speak up for yourself when it's hard. And I realized I need to stand my ground. I just wrote all this to my kid. I want him to grow up knowing that his mom really put her health first and principles first, and that stuff matters. So that's the world we're in. And, I know there will be people who disagree with me, and that's the point that I want to get across to people. I fight for your right to disagree with me. I fight for your children's right to disagree with me. I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do. I'm doing the opposite. I'm not. If people say, oh, don't give medical advice, I would never dream. I'm not a doctor. I don't know your medical history. I would never dream of giving you medical advice. What I would dream of is telling you, get the advice from your doctor and don't let a corporate or a political bureaucrat get in the way of that. I'm here to protect doctor-patient relationships, individual decision-making, and all of that kind of weaves into the book. Even though I wasn't writing explicitly about mandates, I was telling my son, follow your gut, follow your instinct, follow what you know is right, stand up for it. And at the end of the day, you will sleep well at night. I've lost jobs because I've spoken my mind. I sleep beautifully. I do. I sleep beautifully, not just because of the supplements from the center, but that's the message,
Yeah, I listen, I agree with you. You have Big Bird right now giving out, medical advice and others like that. And then you have people, censoring real doctors and experts right now. I think the best thing is open discussion on all this. If it's truly misinformation, allow the people to talk it out, to discuss that. And I do see that there are people here, talking about the mandates and what they should do. And I don't want to get off the book, but I do want it to be an AMA in a sort. What would you suggest to people that are sitting there saying, hey, I actually agree with you. Like, I don't feel I should too. And I had a discussion with someone that owns a genetic company, Kashif Khan, and he owns the DNA company. Yesterday, I was talking to him. And he said, listen, we're now seeing genetic markers of people who shouldn't get it and who should. We could see that it's not a one size fits all and doesn't make sense really scientifically, even based on DNA. So what would be your advice to people out there that are scared, that are saying, I'm going to lose my job if I don't do this, if I, and I know you've been in that position, so maybe you're the best one.
I already lost jobs. Yeah, I've lost jobs. And honestly, like I wrote this book and I know people look at it like, oh, people say to me, well, you're a celebrity. You have, first of all, I'm not. Secondly, I don't come from money. I grew up behind the Staten Island dump in a little condo. Like my parents worked their butts off to get anywhere, to pay off mortgages. I worked myself, to the bone to get here. So I'm not sitting on a pile of money. That's not my reality. Maybe someone else's, certainly not mine. I think there has to be a line in the sand for and everyone's is going to be different, right?
Yeah.
I know what it's like to feel unwell from the Lyme disease. I know that feeling. And I know that when you don't have your health, nothing else matters. I was feeling unwell and I was in a great job with a great salary. I actually had lingering symptoms when I co-hosted The View. I don't know if people know the show, but you have to walk on to set. Like you wave and I was adjusting the heel length of my shoes at one point because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the table because I'm spinning. Once I'm there, I can hold on. I mean, it was crazy. I know that feeling. So I also know that no salary, no amount of money is going to make that better if that's what I'm experiencing. So I take my health. That is my line in the sand. My line in the sand is I know what's best for me. I have doctors that I trust and they're telling me, all of them, the same thing. That's it. That's it. And the chips will fall where they may. And that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm going to stop working. I'm not. I'm, planning other projects, but it may mean that there's a temporary pivot for me. So I think you have to figure out what your line is first. And for some people, it's themselves. Maybe you don't have a medical exemption. You just don't want to get the vaccine. Maybe it's your kid now. You're seeing what's happening with kids and these mandates that they're coming down the pike for little children with this particular vaccine. I mean, kids are not, I'm sorry, but COVID is not a threat to kids. It's not. 99.997% plus survival rate, that authorizes emergency use of a vaccine. It doesn't make sense. It does. So people need to think about this, right? And I hate the word anti-vax. It's so stupid. I'm not anti-vax. Personally, like my kid has received some vaccination. That's my personal choice. But honestly, like this isn't about that. This is about looking at facts. This is about risk analysis. Everything you do, if you had a kid that went to get a measles vaccine and got anaphylaxis from it, your doctor would say, hold on a second. I'm going to write, this needs to be recorded. What you have now happening, and I have doctors that have picked up the phone and had these conversations with me. I spoke to a doctor 2 weeks ago and I know him and we had a conversation and he said, I had a patient who went and got the COVID vaccine, had anaphylaxis from it. And the company was like, well, you got to get the second one. And he was like, I can't authorize this. Right. So, at some point, it's not about health. It's not about science. I would say to people, figure out what your line is. Figure out at the end of the day, what matters most. And I understand the struggle. Believe me, I do. I went back and forth about this for a very long time because there's jobs that I would really love to do and I miss doing. But I know that if I give in and I go against my doctor's wishes and I go against what I feel is right and what I know and what I'm seeing and what I'm learning, it's not going to matter. I could have the best job in the world and I'm going to feel like uncomfortable in my own skin. And heaven forbid anything happens, then what? So I would tell people, figure out what your line is, follow your gut, talk to a trusted doctor, whoever that is, and have those conversations about your concerns and make the best decision for yourself. And that may mean that right now you make less money. That may mean that you pivot a little bit. That may mean that you move. And I know that sounds, oh my gosh, to move, it's horrible. Sometimes you have family. I get the challenges. We're moving. We're leaving New York. We're going to move to Texas or Florida or a place where, the freedom lives, frankly. That's what I would tell people. So really think about, what happens if this or what happens if that. And if you're the people you trust, if something goes wrong, say you get any medication you take could have a side effect, say something goes wrong, who you're going to call? That doctor who told you not to get it in the first place? Now what? What are you going to call Bill de Blasio? Hey, Bill, I know you mandated this for me, but he's not picking up the phone and he's not going to be able to help you even if he does. So I really urge people this has gotten away from health and away from science in a really scary way. So that's what I would say.
I think it's good advice. And I think you should take advice from people who have been through disease. It's very easy to sit there when you're healthy and say, what's the worst that could happen, right? The worst that could happen is it doesn't matter that you're mandated by a job when you can't get out of bed, when you literally can't do that job or you can't provide because you've been, injured in some way or disabled in some way. And even if it's a minimal risk, you got to weigh that risk out and you got to weigh the other side of the risk and everything. And I think that's what health is all about. It's taking responsibility, weighing out risk and seeing what you want to do, but understanding that what's the worst can happen. It could be pretty bad. You see that a lot.
That's the other thing that's concerning to me is that anyone who's shutting down questions is a problem. I don't understand why you can't ask about what's going on. There's concerns about myocarditis in young boys getting the shot. So why can't you ask, hey, what is the risk benefit of this? You have half of the kid population in this country has already had COVID. Why aren't you testing people to see if they have natural immunity and exempting them? I mean, why? This does not make sense. I remember when I was pregnant And I went in and my doctor at the time, my OBGYN tested me for antibodies to measles, mumps, chickenpox, because there are risks they feel are associated with getting these illnesses while pregnant. She tested me, came back, oh, you have antibodies, you're fine. She didn't say, oh, you have antibodies, let's give you the shot. It doesn't make sense. So some of this, I would really just say to people, what makes sense and what doesn't? And you can be pro-vaccine in the sense of maybe you vaccinate your children for certain things. Maybe you strongly believe that the vaccine prevents severity of illness and you've chosen to get it yourself. I'm fine with that. I want you to make those choices for yourself. But I also don't want you to prevent anyone from asking questions about why things are being forced on people. Either you lose your job or you get vaccinated for something where clinical trials don't even exist on certain groups of people. This doesn't make sense. Yeah. So, my message is one of freedom and it's one of health and one of prioritizing people's, individual conditions and individual rights, whatever that looks like. I don't care, really, truly. I'm not someone who pulls, French fries from McDonald's out of people's mouths, or I don't pull I'm not advocating you can't do what you want. I'm really libertarian at heart. Live the life you want and that you choose. Just don't try to control mine, is the message. And that's profoundly American. That's what this whole country is about. It's just getting lost. And I think, Casper, one important point I think here to make is that one of the reasons it's getting lost is because people are terrified. They're terrified. Fear is a very powerful weapon. And I know because I bought into it at first. Mm-hmm. I was very scared. I had a 4-month-old baby. There was this pandemic. I had some distrust of my own body because of the Lyme disease. I was like, am I going to be able to handle this? I had a lot of emotional baggage that was going on at that time. And I was in the news and I was reading headlines and I was getting more and more stressed out every day. And it really took me quite some time. I mean, I worked from home for a long time because I was worried, oh my gosh, I know I supposedly have natural immunity, but there aren't enough stats on it right now. So could I give it to my elderly parents who were around? And I was taking care of my mom who had, back trouble at the time. I really, truthfully stayed in that space way too long. So I own that. And I really feel very badly about that because I know better, but fear is a powerful weapon. So ultimately, you have to get out of that and just be able to look. And when I realized that schools weren't opening, when they could safely reopen, and when I realized that these mitigation tactics weren't like, I worked through 6 flu seasons in schools. I was a former teacher. We never masked kids. These were not discussions that were happening. We know that the flu is at least as dangerous, if not more so, to children as COVID-19, different for adults, but for children. And I just started to see this isn't adding up. The mandates really pushed me over the edge, but be careful with that fear because you can get into that place and suddenly you'll be willing to do anything. And I think a lot of people are still scared and they're saying things like, well, I'm vaccinated, but I need you to be vaccinated in order to protect me. What? Take a minute. I know it's scary. Sit back and just understand that doesn't make sense because if you are protected, you're not worried about me. So are you doubting your own protection? What is going on? Like what is actually happening is all I'm really calling for, some common sense. But fear was a big part of it for me, for sure.
Yeah. And if I could add on to that, because we see that a lot at the center where you have a patient come in that has been diagnosed, went through the conventional realm, not gotten better, basically told they're out of options. And they come here, right? In a last chance kind of place. And
it's true.
And they start getting better and they start being like, wow, I'm feeling hopeful now. The fear's kind of subsided. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And then they go to that general practitioner or that last doctor to get a checkup or to show them, hey, look, I'm doing better. And the doctor says, oh, you're doing better, but we still see this and this. And we think you should do this surgery now that you're a candidate, that you're a little better. And then they say, well, I'm feeling better, but they say you could, regress. And they start to instill fear. And they start to say, well, there's a 30% chance that you get cancer now. There's a 50% chance you end up like this. And then you see a person that was rationally getting better, feeling good at the clinic, stop suddenly and say, no, I'm going for surgery. We say, well, it's your choice. We can't stop you from going for surgery. Of course, that is your choice, right? But I think you made it out of fear. And I think it's not exactly the best choice for you. They go in, they get worse. They come back worse than ever to us and say, can you help me? And then it's really hard Then you already have organs that have been, you're on some experimental drug or something that really is wreaking havoc. And you see what fear does. And this is something that's common, unfortunately. Fear is such an impactful emotion. And you should never make decisions when you're in a fearful state, truly.
No. And I wrote about that in the book because I saw what was happening to me. And I saw there was a big contrast actually in my house because, my husband, Jeremy, like the ceiling could be falling in, like the house is on fire. And he's like, oh, let me just get my shoes. We'll figure something out. Like we got COVID. I was having complete and total meltdowns, throwing myself on the floor. It was Oscar worthy performances. And he was just walking around eating ice pops. He was like, oh, is there a blue? Is there
That's a superpower. Yeah.
And he was fine. He got better faster. He was, and that absolutely played a role. And he was also, the first one to be talking about, I don't know if cloth masks from Etsy are really blocking a corona. Like, I don't know, I was much later to all of this because I think some of it truly was that I was a new mom. I had never had someone else to worry about. And I was consumed with Hartley. I was like, had I not had a baby at that point, I think I would have maybe felt it, but I was like, I need to protect this little person. He has a vulnerable immune system. What do I need to do? Did I sign off? I'm just going back in. What do I need to do to protect him? And that kind of took over. Did I lose you again on IG? I'm trying to keep the IG feed and the.
I know we lost you on IG. Can you sign? Let's see.
Let me see if I can rejoin. Can you send me a new thing to join?
We're asking two separate people that are bad at technology to figure this out.
This is. You know why? Because the phone shuts off after a certain period of time. I don't know why it did that. Let me see. Innovative medicine.
Yes, we did lose her. Let's
Jedediah Bila, join. I'm here.
You are?
Oh, wait. Request to join. There we go. It's sent. So
give me 1 second here. Oh, there you are.
It's coming.
We're coming back.
I'm coming back. This phone is so annoying, Jeremy.
There you are.
Did you?
And we're back. Both
Did you miss me? No. Yeah, I'm terrible at technology, and I forgot that we needed a separate IG live feed. So, oh my God, my social media team, by the way, is probably watching this from LA. Like, oh, Jed.
No, it's authentic, right? You're being authentic. Yeah,
it is. But really, I fell into the fear and I wrote about it in the book because I wanted my son to understand that this happens. You're human. It happens, right? It happens to the best of us. The key is to kind of get through it, to plow your way through fear, to accept, okay, I'm afraid. And for me, it was to accept when it was irrational. Okay, now I'm being irrational. This is not grounded in anything. I need to just take a deep breath, sit back. And sometimes it takes just looking at hypocrisy and looking at facts and kind of saying, well, wait a minute, does this make sense? No, actually it doesn't. But one of the things that I talk about for him is just when you're in this place that can be very challenging, whether it's fear, anxiety, depression, whatever it may be, the first step is to really acknowledge what's happening and to be okay. Like, it's okay. It's okay. And then the second step is to figure out how to get past it. Right. That is all about self-empowerment. Only you can do that. Sometimes I'll go to your dad and I'll say, how are you so calm? Like, I don't understand. He's like, I can't do that for you, which is really important. He can't do it for me. Yeah. No doctor can. They can't do that for you. But what it is key is to have a doctor that recognizes that will affect your healing. Whether or not you can do it for yourself will affect your healing, which is why Jeremy was sick for 12 hours. And I, on the other hand, was having Oscar-worthy performances for 2 weeks. So.
It's part of the healing process, I think, letting go of that fear and just embracing it a little bit and letting it just roll. Trusting in your body too, right? I'm sure Jeremy was just like, hey, I trust this will be over soon. And your Oscar-worthy performance was kind of doubting your own body.
Oh, and he just is, and Hartley the whole time, just like I had an N95 mask that I was wearing in the house, one that I got off the internet, of course, not fitted properly. And the baby's just like tugging at it and laughing. And I'm like, no, no, no. And my pediatrician at one point is like, Jed, he's been in the house with you for 3 weeks. Like he's been exposed. It's fine. Like the baby's fine. And he's just like, Right. So I even like wrote to him, like, you kind of saved all of us. Like the baby was laughing, and just a reminder, like what that lifting all of that weight off of you can do. Babies are amazing at that.
Amazing.
So he kind of was my little superhero through that and the dog who was bouncing off the walls. Daisy probably had COVID. We would never know, but it was truly, I would have a reality show. Of course, I wouldn't be able to show up because I didn't get the vaccine, but regardless, I would have a deal if you could see inside my pre-baby 1-bedroom apartment that we were all in a massive building where you couldn't use the rooftop or go outside during COVID. Truly a Oscar-worthy performance.
And that's all outlined in the book. And I did like that because it's a kind of, it's not a heavy book in ways. It's tackling heavy subjects, but you get to laugh a little bit and be a little bit, have that levity to it. I got a question here because it's about Hartley, this book. So we got to ask some question. Do you think you'll be homeschooling Hartley? I've thought about that a lot. I was never someone who thought about homeschooling until I saw really, just because I was like, I worked in schools I worked in private schools. I worked in Catholic schools. I love the idea of a classroom. You think of, they go into a classroom. It's so cute. They get to hang out. They do these little performances. That's very idealized oftentimes, because I also worked in a private school in New York City that was really functioning like an indoctrination camp in many ways. So, take it for what it is. But watching what went on this past year and just all of these school closures, parents having to struggle. I mean, I know a lot of people who had to give up their jobs. Both parents were working. One had to give up a job because they couldn't even work from home and homeschool their child because the schools were shut down for so long. For what, really? Well, I can tell you, because the teachers' unions and the CDC were dictating policy together. That's a political point. But regardless, watching all of that and watching what's going on right now, with the masking of these kids, I don't know if people have seen these videos, even of little kids, 2-year-olds on airplanes. It just feels very, very, very bad to me. In some cases, it looks like child abuse, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion. I'm not into it, but it makes me rethink the whole school system. And I talk about this in the book too, about diversity of thought and wanting kids to really learn how to think, not what to think, and think for themselves. That's vanishing from schools in many ways. In the same way that you can't ask questions in scientific communities anymore, you really can't question what's going down in schools. Parents are being told to sit down and shut up. You see what happened in a recent political race in Virginia. Parents spoke out. They said, I want to say in my kids' education, these are my children. I mean, anyone who has children or nieces or nephews or students, we love them with such fullness. I mean, I think of my baby, I'm like, there's nothing I wouldn't do for him. So, I am thinking about it. And we're thinking, we were looking at Nashville and Texas and Florida, and we are thinking about homeschooling as something. And, maybe homeschool groups, they still want him to have a lot of that social activity. I think it's so important for kids to be around other kids. And, I had many great experiences as a kid in school. So, and I know there are, many, many good teachers out there who are really frustrated in the system as well. So I definitely want to acknowledge that. But there's just too much going on that makes me uncomfortable and makes me feel like they're trying to take away parental rights in this equation. And there's nothing more important in a child's life than their parents and their family. There's nothing. I mean, teachers are an aid to that. Schools are an aid to that. But if you're trying to tell parents to sit down and shut up, I mean, that's just not a good system to be a part of. So we're thinking about it. Follow-up question to that. Will you be living the farm life? Because I know you mentioned that here, that you want people to have those skills. And you mentioned a friend that has it and you have no survival skills. And in a zombie apocalypse, you and Jeremy probably wouldn't be the best right now, but living on a farm, that's the way to do it. Self-sufficient. I have to bring this up, Casper, because your social media, when you went to Alaska. Oh, yeah. I was like, oh, dude, I would have lasted 4 minutes. I always say, if in is it Survivor and Naked and Afraid? I think it's Naked and Afraid where they take them out on that little boat. Yep. I think I'd like dip one toe off the boat and then I'd be like, oh, I don't think I can do that. I would last maybe 5 seconds. I write about this too.
because I have this master's from Columbia and I followed this very academic path my whole life. And, yesterday we had a dishwasher installed in our kitchen. And I looked at these people with complete and utter fascination. I was like, wow, I can have these elaborate discussions about liberal arts. But when it really comes to having to do something, like my dishwasher's broken, my sink won't work, I need to build a bench for my kid, or I can't do any of that. And I feel like these skill sets are so empowering. I mean, I watched that scene from The Notebook. I don't know if you know that movie. I love that movie, but I'm a romantic. But I watch it. He builds that house for her from the ground up. And I'm like, those are skills that I would trade that for my AP calculus any day of the week. So I wrote that, I want my kid to be able to do something, produce something, build something, sew something. I don't care what it is. There's such a sense of reward that comes from that. And I have a friend who lives out in Texas. He homeschools his little girl. He operates this farm. She did the electrical wiring in his house. I'm like, come on, man, like electrical wiring. I'm lucky I could screw in a light bulb properly in a Manhattan apartment, and part of that is from being spoiled, living in Manhattan for all those years. The super comes and does it, but it's on me, really. That's on me. So to answer your question, I don't know that a farm would be the next step for me, but I will be visiting lots of farms and learn. I love farms. I love the idea of being able to, your chickens produce the eggs, then you go out and you get them in the morning. And I mean, there's something about living like that that's just calming to me, or being around animals and horses and nature. And so I would love that. Actually, someone came to me about a show once that was like, we need to place you in one of these places and just let the camera roll. And
I would watch that.
I was like, is cursing allowed? Or, because it would be I really, truly. But I want to raise my kid to be better at these things than I was. And even my husband, we're city, two little city brats in that sense. And I always tell him, he's like, we need to learn. And we're going to, and we're doing better. Like I can even change my car tire. I know it's a big deal. You're like, Jed, I could do that. That was fine. It's fine. But for me, I didn't have a car in the city for most of my life. I didn't need to know how to do that. So I'm learning. And I think that's the important thing. But yeah, I would love, if my kid could build something like a bench keep saying a bench because we need one, or a dresser, or, oh man, bring me that instead of your, the classes I took that didn't produce much for me.
I get, and listen, I was reading the book and I was so in line with that portion of it. We spend most of the days inside now and not outside, and not building things, not really creating things, consuming mostly, right? We watch Netflix, we binge it for hours and hours and hours indoors and kind of turn our minds off in a sense. And we're not creating anything. We're not outside, and being outside and creating things are not just empowering, they're healthy. They provide us purpose, passion, all these things that I see as some of the biggest kind of challenges for people who have disease is to find that purpose and that passion. So let me go to another question here and try to wrap this up soon. But would you recommend against going into media and broadcasting nowadays?
You know what? No, but I really feel like the real thinking is happening in the podcast realm. The challenge is when you work for big corporate media, that comes with some baggage, like I've worked on shows where the show has a viewpoint, right? The show has a viewpoint. And then there's my viewpoint, but does my viewpoint allow with, can it coexist with the show's viewpoint? I'm an opinion, so it's a little bit different. But it seems like even, straight up, supposedly objective journalism is rich in opinion these days. So I feel that corporate media in many ways doesn't allow people to just be, there's always someone to answer to above you. So the number of people truly that I've worked with, and it's sad, that say one thing on camera and then say one thing when the camera is, it's a lot of people, because they feel that they can't say that because they'll lose their job, or their boss will get mad, or an advertiser will get mad, or the producer says, say this, but not that. Then people aren't getting really unfiltered commentary, Right. And I understand people get worried about, if I do this, am I going to lose my job and whatnot? So I think that's far too prevalent. across the board. So I like these, I follow like the Joe Rogans. I don't agree with everything he says, but I really believe that he's telling me what he thinks. And I think a lot of these people in the podcasting space Dave Rubin is another one who've disconnected themselves from these big companies or found themselves in a company where they really feel like their voice is their voice and that's it. That's where to go, truly. They're making big dents. And I think there's a comfort that comes with that too, because you are actually free. It's very hard to navigate those situations where you have an opinion, but you kind of have to tailor it. I don't do that well, which is why I've been fired a couple of times. But regardless, I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to have really good conversations and say how I feel. And sometimes that's going to be unpredictable and a little off the wall, but that's my opinion, and there's someone out there that's like, yeah, I feel like that too. So let's have a conversation. I really just want people talking more than anything. But I think that a lot of these big networks, it's a challenge to be that and to exist there in those spaces. I mean, it was even hard for me, thinking if I were to one day work at a company that had, say mandates in place, but I was anti-mandate and got an exemption. How does that fit in? That's a lot to think about. How do you navigate that? For me, it would be true to myself and what I believe, but it gets a little bit tricky, those things. So I look at all these people also that work for themselves and they seem infinitely less stressed. I will say they're just like, I built this. Much like building a bench. I built this, it's mine. I'm going to be me. I'm going to do what I love and people will come who want to be a part of it. Broadcast media doesn't always work like that. So
when's your podcast coming out then?
My podcast? Yeah, we're in talks for some stuff like that, actually.
Good.
So I really want, people always say, what are you doing next? What are you doing next?
Yeah.
And I've had some curveballs thrown at me this year. A few that I was like, wow, okay. But, the mandates being the last of which kind of shifted some job opportunities in different directions. But more than anything, I want to be free. Like that, I write about it. I want to just tell people and I want to have people on that challenge me and I want that open discussion. So there is a possibility of that. But my priority in this industry, I got into this business, not because I was a journalist and not because had spent, years as, working for a politician. I didn't come from a political family. I got into this because I was just someone with an opinion who felt like there are people out there who see the world like me. Let's have a conversation. So if that's not happening, I'm not interested. So I can either go where that is happening or I can build it, which has become very interesting to me, the concept of building, especially, coming off of this year where you're subject to a lot of rules that don't work for you. You're like, well, if I build something, then that doesn't happen. So, which I'm sure you built something and it's got to be very rewarding to feel that, you don't have to worry quite as much. You do have to worry, but not quite as much.
You still got to worry, but it's in your control how much you worry and what you're going to do about that worry, right? Mm-hmm. It's not that the stress isn't there because it's your own. It's actually much more in front of your face, but you get to tackle it how you want to. And that kind of changes the whole element of being frustrated in something. It's all on you, which is scary for some people, but it's also, again, empowering. So
very
that's
empowering,
a big part of it. Yeah. So I have a question here that talks about the climate we're in right now. Do you see it getting worse before it gets better? Where do you see things going right now, both in COVID times, politics, the world in general? Which seems like it's a little bit in disarray, flux, and a little craziness going on right now.
Yeah. So people have to remember that politics, political media, all of that thrives on division, right? It thrives on division. That's what it lives on. I mean, if you look at, cable news media, Democrat, Republican, split screen, fight, that's what it is. I worked at The View. It's a lot of people, they like the, there's a lot of division and arguing really builds media in many ways. And that is what you see then trickle out. Now you have social media, which is basically people screaming at each other all day long. So division is a business model for many places. And that business model penetrates out into society. And then we become what they're becoming because we watch it all day and we're like, oh, this is the new normal. So it really creates a lot of societal angst, division, your next door neighbor somehow becomes your enemy. It just wasn't quite like this before the influx of social media, before the influx of, kind of a collusion, I call. You have big tech and you have big media, and you have big Hollywood and you have big pharma. There's all these bigs that are running everyone's life. My last book touched on how big tech essentially puppeteers us and studies behavioral science in order to figure out how to program us essentially into little robots that, tweet and whatnot. People should check that book out too. It was fun. Plus I write some fun stories about an ex-boyfriend that you'll enjoy. Regardless. But yeah, I think that the tide is turning in the sense that when you look at, something like the mandates, now it's involving kids, eyes are open a little bit more than they ever have been. I think that people are leaving. I mean, I've seen a lot of people leave corporate media and go and do their own thing in this podcast because they want to have these conversations. I think there is a greater thirst now for people who actually tell you what they think, and that is growing. I think the thirst for freedom is growing. And I mean, I operate in New York City right now. That is not representative of the country. You go to other places and you're like, wow, this is like another planet. Mm-hmm. So people should do that, should pick up if they're, stuck in these places where, you can't eat a sandwich in a restaurant in New York City without showing a card. Preposterous, ridiculous intrusion of privacy on top of everything else. But that doesn't exist in a lot of places. So I think a lot is going to change. I think there's going to be big changes with the midterm elections. I think the next presidential election is going to be fascinating to watch unfold, but I do think it's going to get better. I think that there's going to be a little bit of a battle with the CDC. The CDC is hanging tight on this, natural immunity doesn't exist. They're putting out studies that are junk science. I mean, right. Really, it's just factually junk science. You look at it, it doesn't make any sense. And this is not just me saying it. These are, I talk to vaccinated traditional medicine doctors that are horrified. Mm-hmm. In fact, my medical exemption letter was written by a vaccinated infectious disease specialist in New York City. He's not anti-vaccine, he's vaxxed, but he was like, this is not for you. Mm-hmm. So he's also sane. So I do think there's going to be a change, but I think it's going to take a while. And I think it's going to take more people realizing, because there's a lot of people that went through with these mandates, but now it's affecting their kids. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on a second. So again, like what we were saying before, what is your line? Is your line your own health? Is your line your kids' health? Is your line your neighbor who suddenly can't, you notice has a pre-existing medical condition and suddenly, wait a minute, why are they being discriminated against? This doesn't seem right. What is it? What is that line? Is your line just living in a place where now it reads like a bad dystopian novel where people have to show cards to get in everywhere? And that's not an energy you want for your kids. You want your 6-year-old to have to show a vaccine card to get into, an activity after school? Is that, so it's going to take some time. And it may be that these areas that like this stuff, like the Los Angeleses and New York, dig in deeper on that. And the people who don't like it leave and go to places where they say, I don't want this kind of life. And that maybe that division does grow a little bit in terms of geographic differences that happen around the country in terms of the belief systems and what's going on. I mean, look at Florida and California, they couldn't be more different. So, I think the hope is really in the people who are thinking people, just thinking, not worried about what everyone else is doing. And I always say, I gravitate toward people who aren't interested in telling someone else what to do. Those are people that interest me. I don't care what they do with their own life. Truthfully, I really don't, unless they come to me and they say, do you think, and they're asking my advice. It's not my business what they're doing. But it is my business that they care enough about my freedom, because if they care about my freedom, they care about everyone else's. And that's somebody that I want as my neighbor, because they're going to fight for that freedom and my right to disagree with them or live a different life from them. So it will get better, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take resistance to these things and questions. And people are going to there's going to be struggle involved. I could have a much bigger salary right now. I don't right today because of these things, but it's okay. I'm doing what feels right for me. And it's going to take a little bit of sweat,
I feel like our generation where we are hasn't really had to sweat too much. So it's like a big change, right? Like my parents came here from Poland, which was socialistic at the time, and just, didn't have much going there and escaped it basically with nothing to come to America and start over. That wasn't easy. My father was already doctor there and had to come into New York and be a janitor until he could, pass his boards and everything and work again. So that wasn't easy for him, but he said it was the best decision for the long run. He could have been like, yeah, it's kind of comfortable. It's not the greatest situation, right? They're kind of controlling my whole life here. But he said, I wanted freedom and I'll sacrifice for that. And I think you're going to have to embrace that a little bit. Some people will, like moving, right? Like you said, you're thinking about moving like a lot of people are. And maybe that's to a place you know nobody and your family's all here. But that may be the sacrifice to show you something better down the road in the long term. So I do agree with you. I think it'll get better in the long term. Got to stay positive. I don't think it's the end of the world just yet.
And I write about that. I write about hope being essential. It's essential not only for your own physical well-being and mental well-being, but it's essential because when you lose hope, you're no longer striving for something, and you're no longer having these important conversations. And you really are quite powerful. Individuals are really powerful to influence what happens at their kids' schools, to influence. I mean, you pick up and leave New York City and move somewhere else and take your money, you're not going to those restaurants anymore. You're not supporting that system. So that's just a reality. And, I think it is going to take, the reality is that people are going to have to realize that if there are politicians or there are, places where you feel that you can't instill, values in your child, or you can't live in a way that feels comfortable for you, then it will require those challenging decisions. Like we're not making this decision, about Texas lightly. I love New York City. Like I grew up here. This is my home, but it's not recognizable. And your breaking point may not be you. Interestingly, my breaking point was, even though I have a medical exemption and I have this kind of unique situation of dipping into a medical exemption and natural immunity, my breaking point was actually when they came for the nurses and the doctors who went through COVID the entire time and treated all of these people, got sick, got better, have this immunity, and are getting fired. That enraged me. Because these are people who were fighting and struggling to protect us when I had the luxury of sitting home and working from home because I was scared, frankly. They were out there doing that tough work and now they're being punished. That's not acceptable to me. So I'm not really truthfully fired up. I'm fired up for my child, and I'm fired up for like these people that were working, firemen and police officers and essential workers that were out there doing the hard work that afforded me the opportunity to live in my fear for a minute and hibernate, frankly, when I shouldn't have been, but I did nonetheless. And that's why I fight. So, and think about that. Think about the ripple effect of people just standing up for what they believe in. Look at what happened with the airlines. I mean, you kind of have to look around and say, what kind of world do I want for not just, if you don't have kids, then what about nieces, nephews, future generations? What about for yourself, your brother, your sister, whoever it may be? What do you want that to look like? And what's for you? What is worth fighting for? For me, freedom is worth fighting for. It's worth sitting out a little bit and saying, I'm going to speak out and see what happens here. And I'm going to just pivot. I'm not going to go away. I'm just going to pivot. And work is work. I know you probably feel like, what you're doing is actually incredible. You're actually healing and saving people. But for me, I'm like, work is a part of my life. But there are all these other parts here that will be compromised if I don't, follow my gut on this one. So people need to trust themselves. And that's why I wrote this too. I was like, my baby, I was like, trust yourself, fight for what you believe in. I want my kid to be able to stand up. If he disagrees, if he's 20 years old and we're having a debate, I want him to tell me what he feels. Disagree with mama. Tell me why. If I've given you that courage to be like, Mom, I disagree, and here's why. Amazing. I'm a good parent. Yeah. I have raised a strong, bold, passionate child. Amen. Absolutely. He agrees with me, great. If he doesn't, but still has the courage of his own convictions, amazing.
Yeah. So we know what you want Hartley to get out of this book. What do you want readers to get out of this book?
Yeah. So what I want readers to get out of it is, first and foremost, I want you to kind of hoping that you'll walk through my mistakes and kind of think about your own life and find yourself in this book. You will find yourself in it. There will be decisions you made that you wish you had done differently. I want readers to kind of feel a sense of shared humanity. We're all people at the end of the day. And that's really important to me. And now it's like vaccinated, unvaccinated, like everyone's in these little compartments. It's unhealthy. Yeah. A society cannot grow. I mean, if you were really trying to destroy a society, you would divide them like this. I'm not interested in destroying a society. I want us all to be built up, and there's no reason that can't happen. But in order for that to happen, you have to be able to walk in someone else's shoes. So I invite people, like, this is my story. I share things I did wrong, things I did right. I want you to tell me, like, write me, tell me, like, do you write letters to your own kids? What would they look like? You know, do you disagree with me? Tell me, find me on social media, find me like on my website, create a conversation where people are really, really talking again. And think about the young people. I always write everything with the next generation in mind because I'm a former teacher, and I'm always thinking about kids because those are future leaders. That's who's going to lead the country. That's who's going to be in power one day to make these big decisions. So I would just say, read it if you're hesitant or you're like, oh, I hate Jed's political commentary, just have an open mind and kind of walk through it with me and share with me. It's an open invitation to talk with me, talk with other people. And letter writing was just one form. You know, it was the way it made most sense to do it in the book, to write to my child. But there's parents out there. I know you're going to read the chapter on mealtime and be like, oh my gosh, my kid did that. I can't believe, there's so much shared that we forget about between us all. There's so much in common. There's so many similar struggles and fears, and there's just so much threading us together. And I know that's not a business model, like I said, for corporate media or for all of these things that are going on in the world, but it's real. And if you take a minute and recognize a shared humanity, that's where the solutions come in. That's where kindness and character and real friendship and all of these things that are really important to come in. So I just want people to take a deep breath. And I also want them to smile. Like, the news is hard and it's exhausting. I want you to pick something up at the end. First of all, you can't help it. I know you see it in the background, but look at this baby. You see this baby, you're like, okay, my day is made. That's A. But B, I want you to read about my heartbreak when I was 19 and be like, oh my gosh, my first love, X, Y, and Z. Just gets us thinking and talking. That is my main goal for always. And get them laughing. I hope I make you laugh. My mom's
I laughed.
My mom's funny. So the stories about my mom. And my mom and I are so different. And that's too, you'll read about family and just, your own family. You'll be like, oh, my family. I have a crazy Italian family. We're all nuts, all of us in our own way. I'm sure someone out there is like, oh, I have a crazy Irish family. I have a crazy, whatever. I just want that sense of we're all people to come through.
Crazy Polish family for me. Yeah.
There you go. Although your dad is the calmest human.
Yeah.
People who don't know Dr. Schultz, seriously, you need to know him because you could spend 5 minutes with him and you leave calmer. Somehow, I know they say that stuff by osmosis. I wish his knowledge of medicine would transfer by osmosis. But regardless, it's you leave and I'm like, I need that.
I know. I wish we could bottle them up. And I've been saying, I wish we could replicate them because it's I want more of these clinics all around. But yeah, it's not easy. It is an artistry to it. And there's so much to it. But I really did enjoy the book. I even love the fact that you did do pen to paper to write it. It wasn't, written on a computer. It felt that way. It felt like you were reading letters that were handwritten, sent one at a time, one after the other, which was really cool. And it made you think about life as each one went by. You kind of connected with it. You felt that human side of it. You detached from everything, all the chaos going on, and you just dove into this, and it brought you back to that kind of simpler time almost of everyone sort of just being humans, just living on this big rock and doing our thing. And I did really
and I'm glad you felt that. And the one thing I'll add is we talked about fear a lot. There was a lot of fear when I started this. I was just writing letters. There was a lot of fear about releasing it because I was like, it is such a polarized time that people are angry. I've got my kid's face on the cover. Do I want to invite that kind of craziness into my very personal book and my very personal world? But I was like, you know what? If I don't do it, no one's going to do it. And this is what we need. We need people sharing and vulnerable and honest and real and raw. This is the world I want. So I can't want all of those things and not contribute to it. So I was like, all right, I'm diving in, not a toe. I'm going to dive right in and see where it falls. So I'm glad it hit you that way. It is very personal. And I say stuff in here that I've never said, stuff about my jobs, stuff I've never said anywhere. So, yeah, I hope people just honestly take a breath and they're like, this is something you can read at night before you go to sleep and you're not going to have nightmares.
Exactly. It's like, turn off the news and just read this and you will sleep better. I guarantee it. I guarantee you will have a more parasympathetic and deeper sleep if you read this book.
That's wonderful. Maybe I should reread what I wrote just to give my parasympathetic system a little bit of a dose.
We all need it right now. And honestly, books usually do it, but a book like this especially, it's not one that's going to, rile you up. Well, thank you so much. And before we go, we promised there would be 5 winners who are going to get a copy of this book and a bottle of Nadivim, our NAD brain supplement, so they could read it a little bit quicker and really take it all in. But I'm going to just read them off and we'll get in touch with you later. We have Naomi Da Silva, Casey Ferrari, Michael Tarulli, Lord Carl Waterman, and Franny Vaughn. Those are the 5 winners that you will be getting a copy of Dear Hartley. Jedediah, Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this
such a pleasure.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Casper. And I'll run into you in the hallway at the center again.
I promise to say hi this time, not run into you, and maybe even have a normal conversation. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Right. And thank you to your audience.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.